You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 207. Today, I have Kelsey General back on the show to cover the top 5 questions we get about, is it autism, ADHD, or speech delay in toddlers and preschoolers mostly. So we cover lots of different questions we get, and it's a great episode, really good to follow last week's episode, which is a classic rebroadcast on the same topic. So hope you enjoy these questions and our answers to the question, is it autism or something else in a young child? Hi there, welcome back. This is episode number 207. I have Kelsey General here. She's our community manager and a coach for the Turn Autism Around approach and course and community. And so last week, episode 206, we did the classic rebroadcast of, is it ADHD, speech delay, or autism? That was from way back in 2019, when I originally recorded that solo show. And, over time, I mean, I didn't even have the thought to write a book at that point. And, we've created quite a bit of content around this very topic. So now Kelsey is here with our top 5 questions that we get about the diagnosis. And we were mostly talking about little kids, toddlers, preschoolers with early signs of ADHD, speech delay, and or autism. We're not really talking about teens with high functioning autism, and definitely we're not talking about adults who think they might be on the spectrum, because our focus really is getting to kids as soon as possible. And so, we don't really focus on teens and adults unless they can use our courses to adapt our materials, because like my son Lucas is 26 at the time of this recording. He's still functioning in a lot of ways as a 1 to 5 year old in terms of language and those sorts of things. So if kids aren't conversational, like Lucas is not, then there's still a need of these kind of general strategies. But of course, the diagnosis is and the signs are very different in a toddler or preschooler. So thanks for joining me, Kelsey.
Yep.
We can just hop right into the questions.
All right. Well, the biggest one, and we get a lot of confusion on all our social media channels on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all our is often, what is the difference between autism, ADHD, and speech delays? They all sound kind of similar when we're reading about them.
Yeah, and they all are very similar, especially when you're talking about an 18-month-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. My newest book, Turn Autism Around, the subtitle is actually an action guide for parents of young children with early signs of autism. But it's also an action guide for early signs of ADHD. And we don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell what it's going to be in the future. We can't, if we have a 5-year-old, we can't look into the crystal, even look backwards, like what would have happened if I would have gotten, my son Lucas diagnosed earlier, or what would have happened if we would have done X, Y, and Z. So my thing is that the signs, especially in a very young child, 18-month-old, 2-year-old, even 3-year-old, are very similar. It could end up to be, quote unquote, just a speech delay, or it could evolve into being more of an ADHD. Or it could be a genius level IQ can often, giftedness can often look like an obsession with letters and early reading and hyperlexia, which we've done a podcast. We can link that in the show notes. With COVID and COVID isolation, could that be a factor in some of the delays you're seeing? Maybe, especially during the shutdown. We did a podcast interview with Dr. Catherine Lord, who's one of the experts in diagnosis. And she talked about how the shutdown and the wait list got longer and the evaluations got tougher with masks on everybody and full garbs. And, so you really can't tell if it is, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old and they are not talking in full sentences and conversational and not sentences like I want drink. That's not a sentence. That's a rote response, a carrier phrase, which I do not agree with. We can link the carrier phrase blog in the show notes as well. But if you have a child that's not speaking or speaking well, speaking according to their age, plus you have problem behaviors, self-care deficits, sensory processing issues, and a child under 5, that to me is autism. If you just have a child with speech delays, but their self-care skills are good, they're eating and drinking fine, they're sleeping through the night, they're, potty training fairly easily, they're not having major tantrums, they're not, then that might just be a speech delay. But you have to take all of the signs together. One of the things that we tell people all the time is check the CDC Act Early milestones. So you can just search for that. We can link that in the show notes too, but you can search for CDC milestones. And then you can say, okay, my child's 15 months old, CDC milestones, 15-month-old. And you can see what a 15-month-old is supposed to be doing. And if your child seems behind, not just in expressive talking, but also understanding language, ability to sit, the ability to sit for a book, the ability to touch their body parts, the ability to play or share or engage with a peer, depending on their age, just all kinds of other things that you might not be thinking of.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And the other thing I wanted to add is it is really, really tricky because some kids who actually do have autism don't necessarily have a speech delay. They may have a lot of labels, letters, songs, they might have the actual word count, but if a child is walking around talking about deers and cows and horses, but they're not
asking, or washing machines or trains obsessively, or
and not asking for water or asking for a cookie, and they aren't really communicating, then that could be autism too. And on the flip side, you could have a child with a speech delay who's communicating everything. Maybe they're signing, maybe they're pointing constantly, maybe they're always checking in with you and they're really connected, and that can be a sign of a speech delay. And it is really, really tricky to tease out, I think. But I also think that people use trying to tease it out as a denial excuse. Well, maybe it's just ADHD. Maybe it's just a speech delay. Maybe it's, just a sensory processing disorder. And at the end of the day, as me and Mary are saying, it is so tricky to tease out that you really can't do it without a full assessment. And that brings us into our next question.
Before you answer the next question, just something you said triggered me to want to read the back quote from Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin wrote the foreword for my book. So I think this sums it up. If your child has no words, few words, or is showing any kind of delays, Mary's book will help, while also providing step-by-step instructions for potty training, feeding, tantrums, and more. So if it's just a speech delay, yet they're typically, doing those self-care and not having extreme problem behaviors, it might just be a speech issue. And also the receptive part of speech is super important. But go ahead.
Yeah. So let's get into the next question, which does talk about what you were just saying, Mary. Specific ways to tell what it is. Like, are there some specific signs that point more towards autism or something that points more towards, speech delay or ADHD?
I'd say the number one thing, and I mean, I'm a registered nurse, I'm a behavior analyst. I also did work with the First Signs grant in like 2000, 2001. I went around the state of Pennsylvania training pediatricians on the early signs of autism. So I got trained and certified in the STAT. I got trained in the ADOS. These are tests that can be done. We can link the blogs in the show notes for the actual tests. But if I have a 2-year-old in front of me who is not talking, I am looking for pointing. I am looking for gestures, for showing, like bringing a stuffed animal to the parent. I am looking for the ability to sit, to attend, to sit, to eat. In my book, I talk about the fact that I didn't know this when I was writing the book, but like picky eating, extreme picky eating is actually one of the add-on potential signs of autism. Are they sleeping well? Are they eating fine? Are they addicted to a pacifier or a bottle? That would be a big red flag for me. Are they having tantrums? And like I said in the last answer, how is their receptive language? Are they touching body parts? Are they singing songs? Like not even singing songs, like just like, if you're happy and clap your hands. Like a toddler who's not saying anything, if they're clapping on imitation, those are all really good signs. So in chapter 2 of Turn Autism Around, I have 10 potential signs of autism. I think I did a podcast on that as well. These are just some of the things I look for. Like you said, Kelsey, like awareness, checking in. Like when I had Spencer and brought him home from the hospital, Lucas was 18 months of age, just turned 18 months or about to turn 18 months. He was addicted to a pacifier. He had no idea that a baby was coming, a baby was in mommy's belly. Like that was not even, he was very darty. He was very hyperactive, wouldn't sit down, very addicted to the TV, wanted to watch the same Barney VHS tapes over and over again. And I write in my book that I literally could have brought a plastic doll baby home for the awareness. So those are, and a lot of this is from my experience, but it's also related to the hundreds or thousands of kids that I've directly assessed. And so those would be the top kind of signs for a 2-year-old. Now, if you're talking about a 3 or 4-year-old, then pointing is out the window because kids, then have to have other gestures. And I mean, if you have a child that's 3 or 4 and very, isn't touching body parts or isn't talking in phrases or sentences that aren't rote or aren't scripted, you could have that scripting from movies and stuff. That's echolalia. That is more into the autism side of things. But ADHD, somebody explained it once, and I don't know if this is how politically correct this is, but they basically said that, autism is a spectrum and ADHD is kind of on the edge of the spectrum. And so some kids can get diagnosed with very high functioning autism, but they've previously been diagnosed with ADHD or vice versa. They could have a diagnosis of ADHD before or around age 5. And then lo and behold, it's really autism. A lot of kids are diagnosed with all of these things, speech delay, autism, and ADHD in some kind of sequence. I remember asking Dr. Copeland, who I did do an interview with on this podcast, who diagnosed Lucas, like, what about adding additional diagnoses. And he basically said autism is the umbrella that covers hyperactivity and lack of focus and impulsiveness and speech delay and sensory processing. And he didn't feel the need to tack on a bunch of other diagnoses.
Yeah, and I think with ADHD, it's tricky because I think a lot of people think that ADHD is, oh, my child's running around and hyperactive and can't focus, and must be ADHD. But often, it's a lack of skills due to, autism or speech delays. And it's really, we'd have to ask a professional, but I think it's probably not as accurate of a diagnosis to look into ADHD for 2, 3, and 4-year-olds.
Yeah. I would kind of shake my head, unless there was really no speech delay or very little and very little self-care. Now, I do want to point out that a month or two ago, we worked with a software company. We did a whole podcast on the Turn Autism Around assessment, which is one page in the book, page 49. We worked with a software company to get that digital. And so it's digital. You get scores in 3 areas: the self-care and daily activities, eating, sleeping, potty training, grooming, dressing, language and learning skills, language, receptive and expressive, as well as imitation and matching, and social skills. And then the third area is problem behaviors, big problem behaviors, little problem behaviors, and everything in between. And what I'm seeing, like, my goal is to get these scores more validated, more fine-tuned. It is available for free autismassessment.com. We can link it in the show notes. You can spread the word. If you're listening, you can do the assessment. I would definitely recommend you doing the assessment. And then watch the webinar that comes right after the assessment, and consider joining our online course, because we are dealing with all 3 things. Now, I will say that a few weeks ago, we had Caddy on the show, and she has a little boy named Santiago, who's only 3.5 now. She joined the course a year ago. She only had the diagnosis, and still only has the diagnosis, of a speech delay. And her pre-assessment, which she, kind of thought about what he was like when she joined the course. She had the documentation on paper that she was able to transfer in. So his self-care was actually pretty good, 60 or 70%. The lower the score, the worse, the symptoms are. So his self-care was pretty good, and his tantrums and problem behaviors were pretty good. Her only problem, really, the child's only problem at 2.5 was his speech score was 20%. Then fast forward a year, now she's taken the toddler course, she added the verbal behavior bundle, she completed all the courses and did all the activities with really little help, very little outside services at all. And now his scores in those 2 other areas that he wasn't delayed in are fine. And even his language score was at a 20%-ish. This isn't like real research at this point. This is just checking in to see, is the intervention changing? He went from 20% to 85%. So huge change. Never got the diagnosis of autism. Half the members in our toddler course don't even have the diagnosis. And I asked her on the podcast, you can listen to it. We'll link it in the show notes here. This is episode 207. So marybarbera.com/207 to get to all the show notes that I keep saying we're going to put in the show notes. It's going to be packed. But I asked her, like, did it upset you? Like, in the modules, I'm talking about autism, but I'm also talking about like signs of autism. It doesn't have to be autism. She's like, no, I needed help. I needed to find out what to do. So I think that the real key is, even if you think it's just a speech delay or you're on a waiting list, which the waiting lists are horrendous, 9 months to 2 years for an evaluation for autism, get in, start learning, start turning things around, whatever that looks like. And you can make progress. And so, in the end, I think the intervention is going to be much more important than the actual diagnosis. And the diagnosis can change. It can go from level 3 autism to level 1 autism. It could go from ADHD to level 2 autism. It could go, it could go to a speech delay, then level 3 autism, then level 2 autism. So nobody knows what it's going to look like in a year or 2 years or 5 years. All you can do is put the right interventions in place and then, be at peace with whatever's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good answer and good specific ways to tell what it is. My answer for that is still the same kind of as what I said in the first, is really look at their intent of talking, because my son Lincoln, who does have a diagnosis of autism and it seems pretty typical to a lot of people, but we still see things come up. He talked a lot, but in monologues, and he wasn't communicating. He still struggles sometimes to communicate his actual wants and needs, but he can talk up a storm. And so there's lots of really, autism is a social communication delay. And so we really need to look at things that are on the MChat, things that are in the assessment. Mary did a podcast episode on the MChat before, which is a screener for autism as well, and really look at those signs. But again, what Mary said is intervention's the key. So that brings us to our next question, which we kind of already answered, but we'll touch on it with some more resources, I think. It doesn't seem like autism. It seems more like just a speech delay. Do you still need intervention, or do kids just catch up?
I wouldn't chance it. We don't have like 2 Lucases or 2 Lincolns or 2 Brentleys to go through and do experiments with.
Yeah.
I would just treat it. I would treat anything, and not that we're trying to, smash out autism or change anybody's personality or change, we are trying to catch delays up, get problem behaviors down, and to the greatest extent possible, so that the child can be as safe as possible. I mean, they're not going to be safe if they're having tantrums and throwing themselves on the ground or hitting their head. So as safe as possible, as independent as possible, eating, drinking, potty training. We want to get those skills up, and as happy as possible. We want a child-friendly approach. Whatever approach you're using, it should be child-friendly. The child shouldn't be crying. And so, in my experience, kids with any kind of delays or differences need more than an hour, 2 or 3 of therapy per week. They need more than just sending them to a clinic for 5 hours a day, because one parent at least, needs to become, in my opinion, the captain of the ship. They need to learn the child-friendly, proven strategies to engage with your child at the grocery store, to know what to do if there's flopping in the Walmart parking lot. They need to know how to pair the words, not to use carrier phrases, not to get more rote language that's going to be a problem. They need to know what to do if the child is scripting, from movies constantly. What do you do? And it's not a matter of, sometimes we'll get like a TikTok comment. Okay, what do I do? It's like, I have like 40 characters. No one's going to solve your problem. Even if you join our online course and community, you're going to need to learn the information to apply it to your child, to assess your child or clients, to implement the procedures, to come in the community and help get unstuck. Regardless of a diagnosis or what you think it might be, I would tend to put my energy in, because I don't want to, even when I found out that Lucas was probably going to get a diagnosis, I thought it was very mild. So I went up to this expert. This is actually in the Verbal Behavior Approach book in the last chapter. And I asked this expert, Glenn Dunlap, well, I think it's just going to be very mild, like PDD-NOS at the time. And, do I need to do anything major? And he said in his 30 years of practice. He was a behavior analyst, I think, or had a PhD. He was in autism intervention. He said, in my 30 years, I have seen kids like you're describing your son, looks like a speech delay, maybe it's mild autism. It ended up to be moderate severe autism, but he's like, I've seen those kids and I think, well, they should be okay at 8. And he's like, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not okay. And he's like, and then I've seen kids with really severe autism who I think there's no way they're going to be okay at 8. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. And so he said, and I've gotten some flack on social media about this, like treated as the most severe autism, even if it's just a speech delay. And I don't mean it like treat it like it's a severe, I just mean there would be no looking back when your child is 8 going, shoot, I should have listened to that, Mary, on that podcast. Like I should have done more. And we don't want to guilt people in, like I know everybody's got their own lives and own histories and own values. And it's just, if it was me, if it was my child, my grandchild, my niece, my nephew, I would want to do as much as possible to learn the techniques to implement, to turn things around as much as possible.
Well, and should you start intervention? Yes. Why not? I mean, we can call it intervention, but really it's just learning techniques to support your child's development, which I think all parents are striving to do, whether your child has a delay or not. But because your child has a delay or autism or ADHD or needs extra support, there are more fine-tuned strategies that you can learn. But it's not like anything, if it all turns out that they have none of the things we're talking about, nothing would harm them. It's all fun and playing and just specific ways to use toys that you probably already have. And so I guess why not do intervention? The only reason you wouldn't is if you're trying to stay in some form of denial. Like there's just so much out there at this point.
It really, we're not talking about starting intervention at a clinic full time.
No.
We're talking about the parent or early intervention professional or ABA professional learning child-friendly, parent-friendly techniques to encourage language, encourage independence with self-care, and reduce tantrums all at the same time.
Yeah.
So you don't have to wait. Okay, well, we're going to work on language first, and then we'll do sleeping in 2 months. No, we're going to do the assessment, and then we're going to make a plan based on that assessment. And if sleep is really a big issue, you got to tackle sleep first. As you gather the materials and get your child to talk, hopefully. And, but, I think a lot of people are in silos. A lot of professionals are in silos, just like, okay, I'm XYZ professional and I am working on language, or I'm working on the sensory system, or I'm working on problem behaviors. And what Kelsey and I do is we work on everything in a child-friendly way. And it's really just good parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that brings us to our next thing. So, okay, I'm on board with you, Mary and Kelsey. Something is up. What is the first thing that someone can do after they do either the free assessment or notice on the CDC milestones their child's behind? So they're noticing delays and signs. What is the first thing they should do?
Well, I think, it's not a race. You don't have to panic. Take some deep breaths. No matter what the age of your child, you need to kind of put your oxygen mask on yourself and really make some planned actions. So I would say the assessment would be my first action to see if we have problems in all 3 areas, in one area, in multiple areas. If you just have problems in problem behavior and their scores are 85% or better in self-care and in language, then we have a turn tantrums around mini course that you could take, which would be super helpful. If you have delays in the self-care and the language, and with or without problem behaviors, you really should take the whole course. But, you don't have to sign up today. You can read the Turn Autism Around book. You can attend a free workshop, follow us on social media. But I would warn you, we just had a member join our toddler course just last week. And she told me she listened to all of our podcast episodes. And we're at over 200, So she has a child who's diagnosed, 5-year-old. She's been listening for, I don't know how long she listened. If it was a year or he has intervention going. It's not, resulting in great turnaround. And I basically told her, like, yeah, she made major progress in sleep and in potty training with just the free information. But I did warn her, I'm like, do not stay in the sea of free. That's what I call it, the sea of free. Because when you're trying to learn anything, we put out so much content, especially now that we're on TikTok and Instagram. I mean, we're putting out, every day we're putting out a couple new videos, and it's confusing. And we're not trying to do that to confuse people. We're just trying to do that to attract people to say, we have some strategies, some really helpful strategies. We have major success stories. Michelle C., we can link in the show notes. Caddy was just a few weeks ago. We have major success stories, and we know that people that do take advantage of joining our online course and community do make the most progress. I learned to play the piano a little bit during COVID. Yeah. Could I learn to play the piano by just searching free piano courses online and everything? Probably, but it would take me a lot of time. I wouldn't have a community when I get stuck. And so that's just for learning to play the piano. That's not that critical if I do or I don't. This is critical information. So once you've identified that you have a problem, and this particular member, we went over her assessment scores, and I told you, like, Caddy's assessment on her little boy was mostly the problem was speech, 20% to 85%. This person that has been listening to all the podcasts, her son was in the 35 to 39% for all three categories. He has a diagnosis. You know what I mean? Like, our courses are specifically designed to help in all three areas. So that, let me listen to that podcast. Let me take notes. Let me listen again. Let me watch this video again and see if I can glean anything. I know it's a fee. People are like, well, why is there a fee? Shouldn't it just be for free? I'm running a whole business. Kelsey works for me, 25 hours a week. I have a full-time employee in Rachel. Like, this is a full-time business. We give so much away for free. But really, to make the most progress, I would encourage you to join our online courses and community, and we can link that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a great first step. That's what I wish I did first. So when I first noticed delays, I spent a lot of energy fighting with people on wait lists trying to get the diagnosis. And well, that is important. Yes, you should contact your doctor. Yes, you should get on wait lists. Yes, you can contact local professionals. Yes, you should do those things. But what I wish I would have done first was just learn what to do. There's a lot more hope in that. There's a lot more progress in that for my child. And there's a lot less stress as a parent for me in that. So
yeah.
And I agree with you.
Like you said, Kelsey, I would get on wait lists. I would prefer a developmental pediatrician would evaluate your child. So I would, if I were In Pennsylvania, for instance, I know that the big, developmental pediatricians are at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and Hershey. Those are the two areas closest to me. So I would find out how to get on both waiting lists.
Yeah.
And actually get on them, even if you think it might just be a speech delay or it might be ADHD, get on them. In a year, when your name comes up, actually they do prioritize really little kids. So if you have an 18-month-old or 2-year-old, you're actually going to get rushed to the front of the line. And kids that are like over 3 are going to have to wait longer. So get on wait lists. You can always cancel it. You will have to put some real time into these assessment application wait list forms. It's not just like, oh yeah, put Johnny on the wait list. It'll take you like an hour time. But I would prefer, if possible, to go to a children's hospital where you're going to be seeing a developmental pediatrician. I mean, you can get a diagnosis from a neurologist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or even a specially trained pediatrician. So if those are your only options, that will be okay. But I still would wait for a developmental pediatrician in addition to any of those others, because developmental pediatrician can help you, can rule out other things, and also is the expert on development.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, so that really brings us to our last question, which is it important to get a diagnosis? We're talking about, is it this, is it that, is it, is it important to label a child?
Yeah, and actually in my book somewhere, I think towards the beginning in chapter 1 or chapter 2, I used to say it's get a diagnosis, get ABA therapy. But with some of the turnarounds I've seen with the parents in the online courses, I mean, I would get on a wait list for sure, and I would look around, but I don't know that I would put these procedures in place. Like I talk about Max in a few chapters in Turn Autism Around, and Max was a client who he was going to get the diagnosis. I took videos of the stat to show that he did qualify for a diagnosis. The developmental pediatrician saw the videos, came in to diagnose him, but with 4 months of intervention, he was now pointing, he was showing, he was talking more. He still was speech delayed. He still had major problem behaviors. He still was delayed, but with those pointing and showing and wherewithal to know what was happening, she's like, I was fully prepared to come in here and give him a diagnosis, but I'm not. He still needs intervention though. So that is a personal decision. Michelle C., her daughter had 2 words, had severe self-injurious behavior, would have gotten a diagnosis of level 3, but she went to a neurologist who just gave her a diagnosis generally and sent her to the next place to get the level. But she made such major progress that it would have probably been level 3, but it was level 1. And now she's fully integrated with no speech delay, and she's doing fine in typical preschool. So was that something else? Or did it just, we wrote a whole white paper up about Michelle C.'s daughter, which we can link in the show notes. I mean, it looked like she made major turnaround, went from 2 words to 500 words in 33 days with my course only and community. But it was COVID and she didn't have any other therapy. So it looked pretty convincing, but nobody knows. Nobody knows if maybe Max had a strep infection that was causing something. Maybe, we don't, like I said, have a crystal ball to look forward or backward. So I think it is a personal decision. Many half the members of our course and community don't have a diagnosis when they join. And it, if I see an assessment that looks like 35% in all three areas, then, if that mom did not have a diagnosis, I'd say, yeah, that it looks pretty severe in all three categories. I would go ahead and, I do think that some of it is based on the severity of their symptoms, if they're having problems in what areas, and how it's affecting your life now and how it might affect your life in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Mary. I used to also think a diagnosis was really important. Like I said, I think in the original podcast I did with you is I thought that once we got the diagnosis, the race was done. We had everything we needed and everything was going to
would go up, but everything
would go up. I did everything we needed. And I still think a lot of parents think that way. Because at that stage, it's like, oh, we just need to figure out what's going on. And while I actually still am pro label, for the reason that in my area, it's really important to have that autism diagnosis to get certain funding, to get certain, if anything does go wrong for my younger son in school without an autism diagnosis, he's basically hooped. So it is really important here to have that diagnosis if they meet that criteria. And I know in other areas, it's also important to get any help whatsoever. But I don't think you should sit around and wait for one or don't do anything until you get one. Mm-hmm. It's obviously the most important step is intervention. And then looking at, depending, like Mary said, on the severity of those symptoms, is this critical? Is there services I wish we could receive, but we cannot because we don't have a diagnosis? Am I trying to work full time and my child's gotten kicked out of preschool and I need them to have a diagnosis so that they can be in a more safe placement? There's a lot at stake, but the core of it is get on wait lists, don't be scared of a diagnosis, but just take steps.
And yes, I think that those are all excellent points. And in the past 10 years, all 50 states now require insurance to cover ABA for autism. They don't require ABA for ADHD or speech delays. So sometimes, especially if the child is wrongly diagnosed, in order to get services, to get an IEP, to get, you can have an IEP with speech delay or ADHD, but, to get more services, to get ABA treatment, to get speech therapy, those sorts of things will probably require some diagnoses. So yeah, it is a talking point and a conversation we have in our online community for toddlers and preschoolers, because it is a stress, and we do help as a community with bonus videos and actually answering Facebook posts, because like for each individual family, it could be like, yeah, I would try to get a diagnosis sooner for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Yeah. So it definitely differs, but I think the take-home message from this whole podcast is, regardless of what it is, or if you're noticing differences in your child, or they're not quite meeting all their milestones, or you did the assessment and you're noticing some higher numbers in an area, just learn how to support them in your everyday life. That's really the key.
Yeah. So in the end, really, really check those CDC milestones, do the assessment, see where your child may be falling behind in the milestones, and then learn more. We have a whole lot of free and paid resources to help you move forward, regardless of diagnosis. So All right. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, for doing all that you do for our course and community and for these top 5 podcasts. I think they're a great addition to our lineup, and looking forward to doing more of them in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Mary.